clock on my computer, it is now 2 p.m, so I believe we should start. Now, if I can just check to essentially preempt the need to retell a load of information that everybody's already aware of. Is there anybody in the room at all who was not here this morning, or indeed at an earlier session of this hearing? That's good news, because that then means that we don't have to have extensive introductions this afternoon. The matter that we are due to hear this afternoon relates to the villages and rural areas, matter I on the agenda. If I can just check, is there anything of a preliminary nature that anybody wishes to raise before we move to that matter? No. In which case, let us move directly to it. Now, essentially here, there were two main issues that were raised in my Matters, Issues and Questions paper. Main issue one, which relates to housing allocations and core policy 14, and then main issue 2, which I've broadly referred to as allocations supporting a prosperous rural economy, in relation to park and ride facilities, in the employment allocation at Brook Farm, Capel, etc. And I was proposing to kind of cut the session into two, so that we deal with housing first, and then allocations supporting a prosperous rural economy. But given that it appears that of all of the folk who are potentially interested in this, it is Mr. Perry who is here. What I was proposing to do was to go first to yourselves, allow you to make your statements orally, to check if there were then any other matters that CPRE wished to raise, and then finally to come to the council. So, Mr. Perry, who are you speaking, or?
So if I'm purely to start off, but I've asked Joe Tasker, who's advising me on all these matters, to speak for me on the detailed.
Absolutely.
Basically, I just disagree that there is not enough rural housing over the whole borough. But specifically, I'm interested, as a resident of Bidborough and as a landowner in Bidborough, that we could do with some more housing. A few years ago, there was a survey by the parish council which showed that we still needed some for young people. We certainly need some for retired people, and we consider that we have a suitable site, which I would like the council to consider. In that connection, I would ask Joe Tasker to be specific, please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tasker.
Thank you. This is site number 5, which is land at 4 Winds Farm, Penshurst Road, Bidborough, and a site of 0.33 hectares. It is just outside the limits to built development on the edge of Bidborough Village, a sustainable village with shop and school and village hall. I'm sure you've had a look. This is a site that has farm buildings that haven't been used for a couple of years, further to the development of a new area of farm buildings on another part of the farm. This is a sheep farming enterprise, and there wasn't room to expand in this part of the farm, and so expansion needed to take place elsewhere to make the business viable and profitable. So we are left with 2 large barns and a couple of other smaller barns on a site that is between housing and next door to Mill Close, which was redeveloped under a planning permission granted in 2003. That was also part of the same farm, and this site is on the other side of this new road, and we feel that it's an ideal site for redevelopment. It's not strictly previously developed land because the buildings were last in an agricultural use, but its redevelopment would offer considerable benefits in terms of a reduction in built development and an increase in openness. It's also in the AONB, and so other improvements, landscape improvements, could be incorporated into redevelopment of the site. So we wanted you to be aware, particularly aware of this site. And also, another important point is that the council have stated it's in agricultural use, which isn't strictly correct. It's now redundant and looking for a new use, not being needed for this agricultural business.
Well, that's probably the first place that I was actually going to start in terms of questions that I had for you. In terms of it being argued to be redundant, are you taking the view that it has a nil lawful use? No lawful use. So, in other words, it did have it's been abandoned.
Yes, it was a storage for lambing, but it was completely surrounded by housing, so it was very unsuitable. And we therefore expanded the farm further down the main Penshurst Road, which is now fully operational and copes with all the lambing facilities. As a result, these buildings are redundant. I suppose they could be.
I guess are we talking redundant in economic terms, or are we talking redundant in planning terms, i.e. abandoned with no lawful use?
Well, I suppose the lawful use is I could still use it for storage, but I mean, there's no economic use as far as the farm is concerned.
No, the reason why I asked...
I could get planning permission to change it for sort of large storage or red box or yellow box or whatever it is called, these sort of places, but that's not the intention.
Okay. No, the reason why I asked that question was just in terms of being clear, and this is something that I'll put back to the council, whether it was land that is still considered to be in agricultural use, and whether agricultural permitted development is applicable here, or whether alternatively we're looking at something that, because it never had planning permission subsequent to the passage of the 1947 Act, is something that has actually passed out of any lawful use because it hasn't been used for a period of years.
It hasn't been used for agriculture for a couple of years. It doesn't have permitted development rights because it's in the AONB.
Right, of course,
so
yes.
you can't follow that route. And it's so whether it's in a nil use or whether its last lawful use was agriculture.
Still.
Yeah, is a tricky one.
I don't know the technicalities. One of the barns would have been built since 1947.
Right,
but
if it has a planning permission, then its abandonment is much harder. Whereas if it was something that had a use that was a lawful use on the day when the 47 Act came into force, it's actually quite easy to abandon. That was why I was asking that question.
I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think I'm confident that its last lawful use was agriculture, and it hasn't been used for 2 years because they don't need it.
Right, which is a relatively short period of time.
Of nil use, I'm sure there is very complicated case law about this, and I would need to look at that. But I'm sure that it's been abandoned for 2 years. Whether that's enough to justify proper abandonment, I will leave that with you.
Okay, fine. Well, I'm sure the council will have a view on it in any case.
Good.
Now, that's the specifics of the site, which you've directed me to, and I'm grateful for that. There was, in your opening remarks, Mr. Perry, a general observation about there being insufficient housing provided in this plan in the rural area. Is there anything further that you want to put to me on that point?
We haven't done anything specific on that. I'm a resident of the village. I'm relying on a parish council survey that was done a few years ago, which showed that we had insufficient housing for people to stay in the village. But we haven't done any ourselves.
Okay, because that was a more general question that I put to the council in my written questions, and that they have responded to, and that therefore I have to go away and deliberate on this question about whether or not the plan sufficiently allocates land in the rural area. But I think I've got a reasonably clear sense of your issues and your concerns. So unless there's anything more particular than that won't have come out from the papers that you want to draw my attention to.
There's more information about the other planning applications relating to the farm buildings where the business has moved to.
Right.
I've put that, and you've seen that
I've seen
information
that.
already. So
Yeah.
I don't think we need to take up any more time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for
Thank you.
attending and putting that to me. Now, if I can come to CPRE, are there any observations that CPRE want to make?
Only that we support the line the council is taking on the main issue 1.
Thank you very much. So, if I can move to the council, and I think probably the best and most efficient way to deal with this will be to ask you just to specifically respond to Mr. Perry's point, and then if Mr. Perry doesn't wish to stay, he doesn't have to. And then we can go into the remainder of matters 1 and 2.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, in terms of the use, I would say that the use it's probably redundant but not abandoned, and
right.
we've no reason to believe it couldn't be used for agriculture at any point in time. In terms of the general housing supply, so you'll have seen our housing supply document PS18, and in Appendix 3 of there, you can see that although we're not yet halfway through the plan period, we've already exceeded the quantity of housing that sets out in the core strategy with 11 years to go. In terms of the submission that was made to us for the earlier consultation in February, March earlier this year, the site seems to be being promoted at some point for rural needs, affordable housing, and that is something that we would potentially welcome. You'll have seen in our statement on the villages and rural areas, document number PS50, we have already delivered 101 dwellings on rural exception sites, and indeed, sir, 30% of all of our completed developments in the villages and rural areas have been for rural exceptions housing. So we would welcome a conversation about how that could be brought forward. But in terms of an allocation in the plan, we don't believe it's necessary to allocate the site in the plan, but if it is being promoted for a rural exception site, it could come forward under general policies in the MPPF, for example, paragraphs 89 and paragraph 54, or indeed core strategy policies, core policy 1 and core policy 14, both promote rural exception sites. And I believe, as our document PS50 shows, we have been active in promoting these sites and bringing them forward. And we don't believe that there's any need to allocate the site. There was one final thing, and the boundaries in this area are a bit confused, but I think perhaps it would help to have a more detailed plan of the area, because I'm not convinced it is in the area of outstanding natural beauty. It's certainly in the green belt. The AONB allocation seems to come very close to it, but I think perhaps some of our homework could be to produce a more detailed plan.
I'd be very grateful if you were prepared to take that away and detail a plan, because
my understanding is that it is in the AONB.
No, it isn't.
Well, here we are. Maybe you can.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
We'd like.
But there are so few of us actually here. If we can actually get.
Well, I would have liked it. We thought it wasn't, and then we were planning a permitted development option, and then suddenly realised it is in the AONB.
Because of course, if it isn't, then the discussion that you and I had a few seconds ago about.
There's a lovely copy of Unless it's changed since 2001.
No, that's the one. That's the one.
So that's the old proposals map with the original AOMB boundary on it, is it? Would there be value in us just coming around a table and looking at the site in the light of the mapping, and then if a particular position is then agreed, the council can go away and document that and put it in. But the point is, you won't then necessarily need to comment on it because it'll just be a case of recording what's agreed.
Those little green arrows are pointing the wrong way.
I lost Mr. Toft when he got through to various numbers and cause and one thing and another. But basically, are you saying that we should submit an application under, what was the phraseology that you used? Greenbelt.
It was a rural exceptions site, possibly, or alternatively, you may have permitted development if it can be agreed that it's not AOMB.
I see. Right.
Shall I just come round and you can just show me the AOMB boundary in relation to the site? For the purposes of the digital record, I mean, we're taking a recording of everything that occurs. So, hence my rapid return to my seat and speaking through the microphone. What I have just seen, I take to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hinton. It's part of the proposals map of the old local plan.
Correct. Correct, sir.
And what we saw was a green wash with a green pecked boundary, which I understand from the key is the Kent landscape area. And then there is a black triangle peck boundary, which is AOMB.
That's
and
correct.
What it seemed to show was that the site at issue was affected by the Kent landscape area, but as I understand it, that designation has fallen away. It's no longer in a statutory plan. And then the statutory boundary, the AOMB boundary, is beyond the site.
That is exactly correct, sir.
Which in turn then means that it does benefit from prospectively permitted development rights. Yes?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I believe that's the case.
Okay.
That means that it has existing development rights? No.
Yes.
I mean, I can't give you advice, but I think you do need to sit down with your planning consultant after this and have a kind of a little regrouping, shall we say, because the planning status of the land is not as restrictive as you had thought it was in the submission that you put to me.
Thank you. Yep.
Therefore, how much better for it to be used more efficiently through a site allocation if you find that there is a shortage of housing in the borough?
Well, that's a point that you've generally made, and that's a point that I'll consider alongside my general consideration of the need for emissions sites. But also, you've got the option to think about some other ways forward on that land that may not have been apparent when you walked into this room.
Certainly.
Okay. CPRE.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Nothing to add. Right. Now, we were in the middle of the council's closing on this. If we can return to that.
Yes, thank you, sir. I didn't have a great deal more to add in terms of the position for housing in the villages and rural areas. I've already been through that, and our statement sets that out quite clearly, that we've exceeded the total in the core strategy, not yet halfway into the plan period. In terms of rural needs, affordable housing, I was simply going on the Mr. Perizone's submission in March this year, where the site seems to be promoted for that use, and I was simply saying, we will welcome discussions on that use, but believe it could be done through the general development management process, and there's no need for a particular allocation for it.
Thank you very much. In which case, that, I think, unless there's anything further that you believe you need to add.
So could I just come back on one of Mr. Todd's remarks that the bonds actually could be usable? The whole point of the thing is that they can't really, because they're completely surrounded by existing housing. One of the reasons we had to move was because large vehicles cannot get in and out of the barn because of the area, and so therefore it can't be used for animals being transported in or out, or feedstuffs being in or out, or hay in and out. And so from a practical point of view, it isn't really usable, is my point.
Okay.
Can I add, in relation to this comment, that it doesn't need to be allocated because it can come forward through a rural exception site policy. That may be the case, but there is also potential here for local housing, with some affordable housing and market housing.
Indeed.
Which is why we've promoted it through this process.
Indeed, and in common with all such sites, what I've got to do is to go away from here and look at the maths, and then if I end up reaching conclusion that emission sites need to be further considered, make that known to the council. So I think I've probably got all the information from you that I now need in order to be able to do that. Okay, well, shall we draw that one to a close? And you can stay if you want.
No, that's fine, thank you.
But you don't have to. Thank you very much. I'm just reviewing matter I, main issue 1, to see if there's anything else that I need to probe that isn't apparent there. No, I don't believe I do. So, if we then go to main issue 2, which I will just again recheck. Now, I did have a question on main issue 2 in relation to the proposed park and ride facility at Pembury, because I seem to recall there being a suggestion in one of the earlier hearings that has been around for a while, so to speak, and hasn't come to fruition. I just wanted to get a little bit more a sense of the history of that as a proposal.
Yes, thank you, sir. It is a allocation in the existing local plan, TP17. We've carried it forward into the site allocations document under policy ALVRA2. It's linked to the expansion of the Tesco store at that site. Some work has begun on implementing that permission, but hasn't progressed any farther than that. So the permission is still current and live, but nothing more has happened.
So just checking that the permission which provides for the expansion of the Tesco store also provides for the construction of the park and ride facility. So it's got planning permission as well as it being a proposal.
Yes, that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. And the reason for it not coming forward is known or not known? What?
There have been various studies over a number of years about the park and ride, and I think that has been identified as the most suitable site, but it also needs obviously sort of works on the routes into Tunbridge Wells. And I think more detail is set out in the draft transport strategy, which is a core document 3.50. But that's the current state of affairs. So in terms of the site allocations document, we considered the most appropriate course of action was to carry forward the allocation that allows for the park and ride, while recognising that the local plan review will soon be coming along and offers the opportunity to look at that in further detail in due course.
Is there, because it's a relatively simple policy, is there any need for anything additional in policy wording terms that would, I guess, make it more deliverable than it currently is proving to be? But it was feeling to me from your answer, and I just wanted to check that the issues in relation to its implementation relate to the programming of works to the route rather than anything to do with it.
Yes, I believe that's the case. What we have sort of allocated here is for the site itself, and in terms of the policy wording, I think we have pretty much carried across what was in the local plan in terms of sort of landscape impacts and screening and these kinds of things, really. So I don't believe there's any more that needs to be said to the policy itself.
Okay. Now that, I think, brings me to the end of the issues that arose for me from your documented responses to the matters, issues and questions in the villages and rural areas that I raised. Now, just checking, is there anything else from CPRE's perspective on Matter 2?
We maintain our scepticism about the park and ride, but we recognise that the planning permission exists, and therefore we're not going to trouble you much further over this.
Thank you very much. In which case, we seem very rapidly indeed to have reached the end of the two matters relating to the villages and rural areas. As I indicated in the morning business session this morning, I felt that the best way to deal with all other remaining issues is in the wrap-up after we've dealt with Matter A tomorrow morning. So is there anything that anybody needs to resolve now in order to be prepared for and able to deliver a contribution to Matter A tomorrow, or to review the homework list and final arrangements tomorrow afternoon? What I will draw attention to is the fact that a further document has come in over the lunch from Cooper Estate Strategic Land, which is a note of proposed oral submissions for tomorrow morning. And I just wanted to alert the Council of the fact that that's been submitted, and I'll be going away to read it this afternoon. It's not a note that I'd specifically asked for, but to the extent that they are synthesising their position from and responding to the Council's own position, it struck me as reasonably user-friendly that they'd reduced what they were going to say to writing. So I was proposing to accept it. Anything else that we need to touch on?
As regards that last matter, sir, we have no objection to them submitting that document. The only query we had, and apologies that we've only had an opportunity to briefly look at it, and I only have a paper copy as opposed to an electronic copy, but the document ID 16A,
yes,
which is recently been issued.
This is the provisional homework list rather than the real final one.
The last page 5, in the actions there don't seem to be any due dates.
No, indeed.
And that was to double check that wasn't...
No, it's not an error at this stage, because I'm conscious of the fact that there were some that we discussed and hammered out, and there were others that maybe we hadn't hammered out. And actually, what I wanted to flag was the need to have that conversation. I think the best time to have it is actually tomorrow. And I'm conscious that because the 11th is now close, constraining you to deliver on the 11th on some of those later ones or more recent ones is potentially unreasonable.
That's helpful, sir, because we can review this list, and if we believe we can deliver work sooner rather than later, we can indicate that to you tomorrow.
I'd be very grateful. I mean, if you can stick to the 11th, then because you're ahead on some of the ones that you had longer notice on, then that would be great. But you've heard it from me. I'm open to suggestions that it's done later, if that's helpful. Right. On that basis, then, I think we have done everything now that we need to do today. And I'm going to take myself back to Paddock Wood and some footpaths that I was asked to walk on, but didn't because we didn't have time the last time I was there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll close and resume at 10 a.m.